Welcome to the Transformational Storyteller Podcast. The stories we tell ourselves and others shape the lives we lead. I'm your host, Dara Lise Lyons. Welcome to another episode of the Transformational Storyteller Podcast. My guest today, Greg Holdsman, has a story to tell about using an adverse situation in his personal and professional life to impact the world in a positive way and to create a whole new life experience than the one that he originally anticipated.
All right, my name is Greg Holdsman. I'm the creator and host of Philly Famous Podcast, on which I interview Philly's most dynamic creators and leaders. I've done about 80 or so episodes, and I now have a TV show under the same name with Temple University, TUTV. How I got into the podcast, I'm a lifelong Philadelphian, also a lifelong athlete, and I went to a school in Ohio called Denison University to play D3 basketball. In my first 2 years, I suffered 4 concussions, and my playing career ended after the third one, which was at the end of my sophomore year. And during the periods of recovery, I really couldn't watch TV, I couldn't read, I couldn't exercise. So all I did was listen to podcasts, and that became my life for like 10 hours a day, just sitting in bed listening to podcasts. And I got super into them. And when my career officially ended, my doctor said you can't really play any contact sports anymore. I transferred to Temple, and I was still, really recovering. It's honestly taken me over 2 years to fully recover. I'm about 95% right now. But when I transferred to Temple for my junior year, I still had a lot of time on my hands, and I figured I would start my own podcast and base it around highlighting the city that I missed so much when I was away at school in Ohio. And that's how it was born. And it started out as a fun little hobby for me, a way to just spend some time not, pitying myself. And it quickly grew, and it's still growing. And for me, it's just been a way to kind of reinvent myself and find a new identity. And like I said, I now have a TV show with Temple, and I'm going to graduate next December. And it's been, like I said, a way for me to kind of redirect my life.
Greg's story of healing from adversity is tremendously inspirational, and if you're looking for an inspirational story or many inspirational stories about overcoming adversity, or looking for ways that you can overcome adversity in your own life, one of our show sponsors, Loving Healing Press, has generously offered 15% off to any listeners or viewers of the Transformational Storyteller podcast. So to take advantage of that 15% deal, you can go to lhpress.com/transformational storyteller. That's lhpress.com/transformational storyteller and enter the coupon code DARALYSE for a 15% off discount. Greg, thank you so much for being here today. It's amazing to have you on, and I'm really excited to dig deeper into your story.
Well, thank you for having me down here. I had to return the favor of you coming on my show.
Yeah, I know, and we'll definitely. I was interviewed on Greg's show not too long ago, and so we will put that in the show notes for people, absolutely, so that they can listen to that. What's it like being on the opposite side of the table? What's it like being the one interviewed instead of the one doing the interviewing?
Well, I've done about 3 or 4 of these podcasts on being on this side of the interview, and I definitely have a deeper appreciation now for my guests, for what I put them through in terms of making them answer questions about their own lives and what they're doing. It's tough. It's tricky. I'd much prefer being on the interviewer side.
Yeah, and I feel like it's interesting though, because we are talking about your life and what you're doing, but I feel like you have such a purpose and such a mission, and that people need to know about that. And so does it become easier when you're not so much talking about you, but talking about like kind of like what drives you and the purpose that you're called to do?
Yeah, I mean, it's always been pretty natural for me to tell my own story. I think it just became so much of who I was, and it's interesting now. This is the first time that I've talked about my story since I've been quote unquote healthy. Every other time that I've told it, at least formally or publicly, has been when I was really going through it, and I was much more in touch with how I was feeling and much more aware of my symptoms, and I was in a way more negative, but it was very real for me. So it's interesting now to think about it from a different perspective. I'm in a much better place in my life, so I don't have to tell it with some gruesome details that I used to tell it with, and it means something different to me now. So I completely lost track of what you asked me.
No, no, that's perfect. Well, and I think it's interesting because the name of this podcast is the Transformational Storyteller Podcast. And I think that transformation, when you're in the middle of that cocoon, right, you are like in the process of emerging, it's a whole different experience than when you're on the other side. But I find it helpful and useful to remember what it was like. So do you find that you kind of like have to force yourself to remember what it was like in order to value where you are now, or do you not need to do that?
Well, you used an interesting word. You said force yourself. And one thing that I've kind of realized over the last year or so, 2 years since I've gone through the injuries, is sometimes when I do try to think about my story, I do think like, oh my God, I have to remember exactly the way I felt so I can tell it perfectly, and so it means exactly what it should mean. But what I realized is that your relationship, I think we talked about this on the podcast that we did together, is your relationship with the past is constantly changing, and and therefore your narrative is always changing. So for me, it's not so much about forcing myself to remember the details as they once were, but as they are now.
Right.
So it takes a little pressure off myself to not have to tell it exactly the way it maybe was, but that's not so much important, I don't think. I think it's about what it means for me now.
What does it mean for you now, what you went through? I mean, do you feel like there were a few like takeaways that you really have held on to?
Yeah, a lot. I mean, I think that there was a lot of times when I was really going through it where I thought I would trade anything to not be going through it. Yeah. I don't care if I'm not successful in my life or my life doesn't take on any meaning. As long as I'm not feeling the way I do right now, I will live that way.
Yeah.
I will live a very normal, comfortable life. As long as I don't have these symptoms and I'm not feeling the way I do right now. That being said, now that I'm healthier, I don't want my experience to go away. Like, I want that to be what I went through because I think it's made me who I am now, and it's all paying off. But again, if I were to spin back into where I was, I probably would change again because it was just so painful and uncomfortable in the moment. But now that I feel healthy again, that experience has so much positive meaning. Yeah. So it's a tricky balance to understand that something, adversity and tragedy, it makes you who you are, but it's not fun to go through.
Oh no, it's excruciating to go through, and I think that excruciating pain sort of needs to be felt. There's nothing to do but to feel it and to muddle through. And you had mentioned previously, feeling a sense of self-pity, and I kind of wanted to ask, what's it like? I mean, here you were this incredible athlete. I'm sure you're still an incredible athlete, but you had a trajectory, a certain trajectory that you were thinking your life would take of playing college basketball and having these hopes and dreams. And so, what level of grief do you have now, or did you need to go through to sort of get to where you are now?
Well, grief, so I didn't really explain it too much in my little intro story, but the grief from losing basketball wasn't really the main thing. It probably took me when my basketball career officially like ended, and I knew I wasn't going to play anymore.
Yeah.
That maybe lasted a month or so of the sadness of losing a big part of my identity and what I really loved to do. But after that first month, when my health was still getting worse and worse, the grief became, okay, am I going to live a normal life? Am I going to be a healthy human being?
Yeah.
And that's when like a real deep, heavy depression set in. It was much deeper than losing basketball. It was, am I going to be able to read? Am I going to be able to like go to school again?
Yeah.
And then beyond that, like, am I going to be able to be a functioning human being? That became a real fear and a real worry. So that level of grief was a completely different thing from losing a sport.
Right, right. And it sounds like because you were so worried about that, and because that in and of itself was so painful, it almost like eclipsed any concern or any ability to think about, the more surface level things, right? Like that it was so deep that you just had to...
I think that if I had gotten, at any point in the last 2 years, if I had become healthier earlier, I would have then, had time to sit back and think about losing basketball. But now that it's been over 2 years, and I'm just now getting healthy, like I've been through so much that basketball just feels like a lifetime ago.
Yeah.
Whereas if I think like it only took me a couple months to heal, I would have then really reflected on basketball and probably, I probably would have been pretty sad about that. Because it would have been so present or so recent that I would have lost it. That would have been so fresh in my mind. But now that it's so far away, I've gotten back into working out in terms of shooting and getting back in shape. I mean, I haven't done any contact or anything like that, but I've stayed in touch with the game. But I mean, like you said, like the sadness of losing it was just so minuscule in comparison to the reality of what I was going through.
Yeah. Well, and also, I've had some concussions myself, and my experience of having a concussion is that there is the very real depression of, okay, I can't function in my life, or I'm in pain. But I think concussions themselves and brain injury and brain trauma can cause like a biochemical depressive effect. So do you think, was that part of it as well?
It's really interesting you say that, because when I explain to people what depression was for me, because I think it's different for everybody.
Yeah.
What it was for me was twofold. Exactly what you said. It was, the first part of it was, okay, losing basketball, being down about my situation.
Right.
But I think a larger part of it was, like you said, like a chemical imbalance in my brain from being knocked.
Yes.
It wasn't something that I could just flip a switch, flip my attitude and be like, okay, I'm going to feel better now. I needed a chemical intervention, and that's why I started on antidepressants and all that. But you're exactly right. Like the actual knocks to my head caused a chemical imbalance.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. And that's why, CTE is so talked about and so prevalent. And why, I did some research on this because I went through it wasn't the same thing, but when I had my concussions, like the brain swells. It's almost like you get a bruise or something, and your body wants to swell, but there's nowhere for it to go. So your brain is just swelling in your skull, and it's just painful. I know you mentioned that all you could do was sit, in a dark room and listen to podcasts, and then that in and of itself creates a lot of pain. So I guess I want to ask, like, looking back now, do you remember like when things sort of started to shift for you, or what was the catalyst to starting to kind of feel physically better?
Well, yeah. What was difficult is that I've had a few of those moments and then setbacks.
Yeah.
So I've had 4 concussions, but I've had about 20 what I called irritations, which were like minor little teeny bumps that everyone goes through, like everyone has in everyday life. But for me, I was hyper acutely aware of these bumps.
Yeah.
And they would cause about a week more of intense symptoms. So like some people might call them new concussions. To me, they weren't, because they were just a week long of, exacerbated symptoms. So I've had about 20 of those. So this past summer, I started to get healthy again. I was working out again. I was starting to because for me, exercise has always been the last straw. I could read, and I could watch TV and all that kind of stuff with barely any symptoms, but exercise was always the thing that really got to me and really messed my head up. So this summer I got to a point where I was exercising again, and then I had another major setback, and school started up, and it just all spiraled downhill again. And I went. What I thought was I'm at ground zero again. That was the wrong word. Ground zero.
Right.
It means something else. But I was at the bottom floor again, and I spun myself into a deeper depression, and I also had been off the medication for a while. So I had to drop out of school for the semester, and so this was in September. We're now in March. I went to a concussion kind of specialty place in Orlando called Plasticity Brain Center, where they were apparently doing this innovative work with brain injuries and using new techniques. And I was there for a week.
Okay.
And I was a little disappointed. It was. I thought I made some progress, but I was disappointed because I didn't feel it wasn't the magic bullet I was looking for.
Right.
So I came home. I was still doing their exercises 3 or 4 times a day for about another month, and I still wasn't really getting better. And I got back on the antidepressants, and then that made all the difference, at least at the start. It was crazy. My main symptom over the last 2 years has been dissociation, which other people call fogginess. It essentially feels like you're drunk and hungover at the same time. You feel like you're in a dream, you're not really there.
Right. Yeah.
And I would feel that 24 hours a day, every day, for months at a time. And I can't explain why or how, but the antidepressants really almost cured that. And I can't explain the science behind it, but when I asked my doctor, he basically just said the antidepressants just make your brain work better. So maybe he couldn't give me an answer, but the antidepressants really helped that. So there was the Orlando treatment, there was the antidepressants, and then to clear up the last bit of symptoms, I started using CBD.
Really? Okay.
Which I'm not sure if everyone knows. It's a buzzword right now.
Yeah.
But CBD is the strain of marijuana that's not THC. It doesn't get you high. It just has medical benefits. So a friend of mine who has concussions recommended it to me, and I started taking it every day. The oil, and that kind of cleared up the last bit of symptoms. And for the last month and a half now, I've been exercising every day. I've been going full force in school, and I've had no more restrictions. So I think I feel about 95%, and I may never get above 95%.
Yeah.
But I had much of the last 2 years, I wasn't even 20%. I felt like I wasn't even a human being the way I felt.
Well, and talk about the transformation, the fact that you went from just sort of saying to yourself, okay, well, as long as I have some sort of existence, I just want to be a normal, human being, and now you're functioning at a level that many people who have had no history of brain injury, no history of setback, aren't functioning at. The fact that you're in school, you're working, the podcast, Philly Famous Podcast, you've had how many interviews? You said
I've done over 80.
Yeah, over 80 interviews. And it's not just an interview. You're doing a deep dive into these people's lives, and you're researching and you're cataloging information, which if someone's dealing with dissociation or brain fog and trying to research people, I just feel like it's incredible what you're doing.
Well, thank you. Life's become a lot easier, and in general, any small real life issue that I've had in the last few months feels it's nothing to me.
Yeah.
A bad day. What's a bad day? I feel good. That's nothing exterior that happens to me really gets to me anymore. Yeah. I think what I was trying to say with going back to the podcast is now I've done so many interviews where I felt terrible that now it just feels like light work. You know what I mean? I've done it when some of my best interviews actually have been when I was dissociated, when I felt completely out of it. So now it's just not difficult. I mean, I still have a lot of. I don't mean to say I'm in any way a perfect or a great interviewer. I'm still getting better every day. But in terms of the way I feel while I'm interviewing, it's so much more comfortable now.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and also, I wonder if part of you mentioned that, some of your best interviews have been when you're maybe not on your game. I wonder if it's because the interview itself kind of gives you like a purpose or something to focus on outside of the pain or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. It was definitely a therapeutic tool for me to be talking about other people's lives and to get out of my own head and that self-pity we were talking about, and to be constantly analyzing how I felt. To be able to like sit down and take like you said, take a deep dive into someone else's life was helpful for me.
Yeah, well, and I mean, I wonder, because you're young, I don't know exactly how old you
22.
are. You're 22. Do you find that, I mean, having gone through what you've gone through, like, are you fully able to relate to your peers, or is there a part of you, because you mentioned that you're not really sweating the small stuff, that you have this deeper, larger perspective, and then you're also interviewing, like movers and shakers around Philly who are doing big things. Like, do you find that you're kind of not like super invested in the things that your peers are invested in?
Well, I think everyone goes through their shit. Like everyone has a trauma at some point in their lives. Mine just happened to be when I was between the ages of 20 and 22.
Right.
Some people go through it when they're younger. Some people go through it when they're older. I'm very fortunate to have an amazing family. I have tons of support. I have lots of friends that don't have that in their lives, and that have had parents leave when they were young and stuff like that. So everyone goes through trauma and at different levels.
Right.
So I'm in no room to kind of say that my trauma was bigger than someone else's. But like, I mean, so yeah, I think it is interesting. I think that it's allowed me to connect on deeper levels with some people, whether they're my age or older,
Right.
because I've gone through something real, where before what I went through, like I think I liked who I was, but I didn't really have a story to tell, and I didn't really have something deep to connect with people about. But now that I've gone through something that has put me into a depression and has really impacted my daily life, I now can really connect with others that have went through similar situations.
Yeah.
So I didn't really answer your question there, but yeah.
No, I feel like you did, and I was also, I read up on you. There's some really great articles about you and what you've gone through, and one of them was speaking about, and I remember too in our interview together, you talked about this, that like you had been exposed to a lot of different people from a lot of different walks of life your whole life because of basketball, because of different things. And so I wonder if having that ability to kind of meet people where they are and also like understand that everybody does go through stuff. Like I wonder if that's something that came even before the accidents.
Yeah, I think my awareness of all that has always been there. I think the empathy from it didn't really develop until what I went through. So yeah, like you said, growing up, playing basketball, but also the schools that I went to allowed me to be around and be friends with people from all walks of life. So I grew up kindergarten through ninth grade. I went to an elite private school, Penn Charter, and I had friends there that I had one friend that has a hockey rink in his basement, an ice hockey rink. That type of wealth.
Yeah.
And then I needed a life change, and I went to Central High School for 10th grade through 12th grade. It's the most diverse school in the country, like statistically. It's 30% white, 30 Asian, 30 black, and 10% other.
Wow.
And, I had friends there from all different parts of the city, all different parts of the world, different cultures. And, and I had friends there that shared a bed with their own brother. Such different levels of socioeconomic status. But, it's not that I only knew people like this. Like I was really good friends with people from all over the spectrum.
Yes.
And that's always allowed me to feel well versed with lots of different types of people, and that's been huge for me as an interviewer. And that's something I didn't really think about until recently when I was asked about that in a recent article. Is that's really helped me to be able to listen to others while I'm interviewing them and really be able to understand their stories, because I have really close friends that have like I said, have been from all walks of life. So that's been helpful as an interviewer.
Well, and I think, you mentioned empathy. I think that is the great, like, human unifier, right? That we all have pain, we all have trauma, we all have, areas of ourselves in our lives that we wish were different. We all have things about ourselves that we like, and I think that that ability to connect with people sort of regardless of the top layer circumstances is really, is critical. And the more connecting with other people that we do, the more aware we are that, like, we're all basically the same.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
We all have the same fears, same insecurities.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, we all go through life at like I said, different levels and different times, but we all go through it.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, in terms of kind of fears and insecurities and things that we're going through, I mean, you've just come out of this incredibly painful time, and I'm wondering, like, what are the next sort of steps for you? What are the things that are next, like, in your life, the challenges that you're wanting to take on?
Well, it's funny, like, my mom is, like, stressing like crazy about me getting these internships. And again, like we talked about, for me, like, yeah, I'm going to try hard to get these, good internships, but this is not something that's going to stress me out. It's not something that's going to bring me down, because I've been through so much worse. And for me, just feeling healthy on a daily basis, being around good people, eating good food, exercising, that's what's going to make me happy.
Yeah.
Everything else is gravy. So yeah, I mean, I've been grinding with my podcast, and I have this TV show now, and I would love to continue on this path to be a high-level interviewer. And for that to happen, I'm going to need to do well in school, and I'm going to need to network and get jobs. But again, like, that, to me, that's not going to cause any emotional pain. Like,
Right. Yeah. Well, and how does the sociology fit within that, like, life view?
Yeah, I mean, so I started at liberal arts school, and I took a lot of liberal arts classes, like philosophy and psychology and political science and sociology, and I ended up really liking the study of people and culture. And when I came to Temple, that's when I started the podcast, but it was too late to change my major into media.
Right.
But that's not a bad thing. I actually really like being in sociology, because I think just the liberal arts in general helps you to become a good critical thinker, a really practiced writer, public speaking, which has been helpful.
Yeah.
And for me, I know I really value lived experience, and we've talked about my experience with different types of people, but in sociology, you also learn about different types of people and human interaction and societal issues. So it's all helped me, I think, become a better person, which has allowed me to be a better interviewer.
Right. Well, and a better understander of the dynamics that make people, like, that make us who we are, And I think that so much of, like, I guess so much of who I am is a product of, like, my innate being, but also the relationships in my life, the culture that I grew up in, the family systems, and sociology deals with all of that, right?
Yeah, it really, like, applies to, like I really could go into any field because I'm a sociology major.
Yeah.
I feel like I have a really good baseline understanding of human nature.
Right.
And that's been helpful.
Yeah. Well, and so one of the things that I like to ask all of my guests who come on this show, because it is a transformational storytelling podcast, is, if you could sort of look at your life as a story, as a narrative, and you could go back and sort of pull out maybe, like, a moral or a lesson or whatever, like, what would you want people to learn from your life example?
So I could pick out one moment or one...
Or, yeah, like a lesson or a theme or a moral or something like that.
I mean, there's a few that come to mind.
And you don't have to limit yourself to one. You could tell a couple if you want.
I think, back to empathy and kindness, I think I was never a bully in any sense, but just, like, any moment where there was any harmful intent or anything, any meanness. That's like the only thing that's like cringeworthy for me when I look back at my life. Again, like I said, like I've always been a relatively kind person, but anytime I wasn't, those moments I wish I could take back.
Yeah.
I think just in general, being good to other people is so important and can take you such a long way and can really change other people's lives if you're just kind. There's that, and then there's also Jimmy V, who's like he was a coach at North Carolina State in the 80s, and there was a documentary made about him. He died of cancer, and his quote at the ESPYs in his last ever speech was, "Don't give up, don't ever give up." And not to get too morbid, but there was like real moments in the last 2 years where like I was very close to giving up, and I think just for anybody going through any real tough issue or trauma, just knowing that it can always get better. Yeah. I think that's so important. Especially like you said, like the chemicals in my brain were fucked up. So like I had to really dig deep to really get myself through what I was going through. But what really just stuck in my mind was like it can get better and it will get better. So that's the second thing.
Yeah, well, and I have so many follow-up questions about those things. So in terms of like believing that it can get better, because when your brain chemistry is off, and I've had that, I've had that both from a post-concussive issues, I've had that from just like life depression and anxiety and suicidal ideations and things, and thank God it's been a while, but there is a part of you that feels like it never will. I think that's a symptom of the depression.
Absolutely.
Feeling like, no, I am here and this is where I'm going to be for forever. So for you personally, like what are you believing in? Is it a spiritual thing for you? Is it like a process thing? Like what do you believe in?
Yeah, I think, it's so cliche. My grandmom like preaches this to me. It's just like everything happens for a reason.
Yeah.
What will be will be. And for me, yeah, you're right. There was extreme moments of hopelessness and helplessness, where it was like I didn't see the light at the end of the tunnel. It was just gone. It was darkness. But yeah, that just the simple thing is like everything happens for a reason, and just the belief that it has to be some deeper meaning here. This can't just be my life.
Right. And I don't think you would have found your life purpose if not for these concussions. I don't think
absolutely.
that Philly Famous podcast wouldn't exist.
Right, right.
You wouldn't be sitting here today. You probably would have just finished out your basketball career and then you'd gone into a job doing what?
I don't know.
Right.
But you're right.
Yeah,
You're right in the sense that I found a deeper purpose, but it's more than just the, external stuff like jobs and all that, like, and what I want to do in my career. Like, it's really changed my perspective on who I am in the world around me. And that, again, like the question that has been at the forefront of my mind for a long time has been, okay, what is more important, meaning or happiness? Because like I said, there were moments where in the last 2 years where all I wanted was ignorant happiness. I don't care if I understand myself or the world any better than I do right now. Like, I just want to be ignorantly happy. And I thought that was what, at the end of the day, was important. And that still might be what's important. But what my thought is right now, and I could be wrong, is that what's almost more important than that is when you get to a deeper self-understanding and understanding of the world around you, that deeper level of meaning can turn into a deeper level of happiness than just ignorant happiness.
I think ignorant happiness is a very sort of fleeting thing. Like, I think it's possible to be ignorant and happy in a given moment, but I think that ultimately what gives us a sense of genuine, like, collective, sustained happiness in life is to have more of a sense of meaning or purpose.
Well, yeah, I agree. I don't think happiness is sustainable per se. I think happiness is ebbs and flows.
Right.
I don't think it's a constant thing, because then it wouldn't be happiness.
Right. Yeah.
It has to be compared to something else. But I think that, hold on, I lost my train of thought. So I think that to achieve real meaning, you have to go through some sort of trauma.
Yeah.
And I think that my theory, it hasn't been proven yet because I haven't got to the other side of the mountain. My theory is that when you go through a deep, deep trauma, inevitably going to be quote unquote like woke to the world
Yeah.
and the ugliness in it, and that's going to set you into depression. And once you get out of that depression, I think there's another side of the mountain where it's a really deep, genuine level of not bliss, but of meaning and happiness
Yeah.
but it has to be born out of pain.
Well, and I mean, I can speak to that a little bit from my own experience, being, years on the other side
Right.
of eating disorder and depression and all that. Is that I agree with you. I think that like there does come this like moment of awakening and this experience of it, but also because of the nature of being a human being in this world, I find that like it's possible to have that happen and then go back into like being unwoke or whatever. Like I feel like that meaning is something that like it doesn't just happen once. It's like you mentioned exercise. It's like you can exercise once or even for a week or even a month or a year, but then if you stop doing it, those muscles kind of go away and atrophy, and then you have to kind of like do it again. So I think we all go through a lot of different adverse experiences in life and get to the other side a better person for them.
And that's why the process of self-discovery doesn't end.
Yeah.
Like, it's not like, oh, just because I went through what I went through, I'm now who I'm meant to be, and that's it. Like, no, life's going to go on, and I'm going to go through more trials and tribulations and much more moments of self-doubt and self-discovery. So I completely agree with you that it's not something that just turns off and it's over.
Right. Well, and you mentioned about meanness. That you like that those are the cringeworthy moments, you said, for you when you look back. And I wonder, like where do you think that comes from? Because I know I used to be less kind to people than I am now, and I certainly used to be less kind to myself. And so do you think empathy is the thing that allows you to like sort of be less mean? Do you think it's self-centeredness that kind of creates mean? Like, what do you think kind of leads to that?
What's the real purpose of not being kind to somebody? Like that to me, I think despite the seriousness of my circumstances the last 2 years, I have actually begun to take myself much less seriously, and take the world much less seriously. And when you really break it down and you think about how small you are in comparison to the universe, I just went off a tangent, but like, what's the purpose of not being kind to somebody?
Right.
What's that gonna achieve for you or for anybody else? It's just putting negative energy into the world, and who needs that?
Yeah. Well, and I think the kinder that we are to other people, the more connected we feel to them, and to ourselves. I mean, I think that really, in terms of like, to bring it back to the sociological perspective of what you're studying, like, I mean, I think that being unkind to anybody, it's like, it creates this sense of false separation, right? And then there is no way to really connect with them.
Well, all like animosity and meanness is really only stems from your own fear and insecurity. It's really never about the other person. And once you're aware of that, even if you still feel those insecurities and that fear, the awareness that's what you're feeling prevents you from taking it out on others.
Oh my gosh, well, this has been so great. I feel like I could talk to you for hours, and I felt that way when you interviewed me. So definitely I want to make sure that people know kind of like where to connect with you. So if you could just tell all our listeners and viewers kind of where to find you and where to find Philly Famous Podcast, that would be great.
Absolutely. First of all, thank you so much. This has been great.
Yeah.
Philly Famous Podcast, you can find that on iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, wherever you get your listening. It's Philly Famous Podcast. We're on social media, on Instagram at Philly Famous Podcast, on Twitter at Philly Famous Pod. We have a website at phillyfamouspodcast.com where you can find all the episodes, the 80 episodes, plus I think we now have 5 or 6 TV shows up there. They're on the website. It takes you to YouTube. We've done Aaron McKee, Mark Vetri, Nicole Marquise from Hip City Veg, Chill Moody, one of Philly's best rappers. Those are the TV shows. So you can find all that on the website. You can feel free to reach out to me through there. An email, it's just greg.holdsman@gmail.com. Would love to connect with anybody. Always looking to collaborate, have new guests. I think that's about it for me.
Yeah, well, that's a lot, and we're definitely going to put that in the show notes so that people can, link up with you there. And thank you again. I've learned so much, and I'm inspired to be kinder, and I'm also inspired to really, reflect on the things that matter and the things that are meaningful, and to not take life so damn seriously. So thank you so much.
No, thank you so much.
Many thanks to our show sponsor, Just Strong. Just Strong is a lifestyle and clothing brand for athletes that emphasizes the experience of getting back up after adversity and really pushing through during difficult times. Their motto, or their logo, is the squat, because what they say is that after getting down, the real strength and the real work is in getting back up to your feet. So Just Strong has offered 10% off to any of our viewers and or listeners. So to take advantage of that discount, go to juststrong.com. That's juststrong.com, and enter the coupon code DARALEASE10 for 10% off your purchase. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Transformational Storyteller Podcast. As always, thanks to our episode sponsors, our production team at Rebel Hill Consulting, and of course, many thanks to you, the listener. Whoever you are, wherever you are, I hope you're creating stories that empower you and inspire others.